All right, cool.
All right, we're live?
Yep, we're live.
All right, what's up, everybody? Logan Blake, Thunder Bay personal trainer here. We got a debate today. We got Dr. Avi against Conscientious Omnivore. This is a debate about GMO versus organic. Look at that nice display there. Beautiful, beautiful. Half GMO, half organic. I'm undecided.
I like it.
I'm undecided. I think there's pros and cons to both. I'd like to hear both sides. Dr. Avi's taken the side of GMO, and Conscientious Omnivore has taken the side of organic. And so Dr. Avi's YouTube channel is going to be listed in the description box. And if you want to introduce yourself quickly, you can do that now.
Yeah, sure. So my name is Avi. I'm a medical doctor and a vegan, and I take the anti-organic position in this debate. That's about it.
All right, cool. And my name is Pal. I have the channel called Conscientious Omnivore, where I do a lot of gardening and things like that. So I feel pretty passionately about veganic gardening specifically. So not just organic, but veganic, where I pretty much try to not use any animal inputs. So that's the position I take.
Oh, I don't think we're going to necessarily disagree then. Hold on. Wait. What do we just... Wait, okay, because here's the thing. Well, let's just get right into it, unless you wanted to say something, Logan.
Yeah, I mean...
Oh, I was just going to say that I'm going to be quiet right now for the rest of the debate. I'll let you two talk, and then if you two just want to clarify like your whole positions before you go, that would be great too.
Yeah, so I think it's important that I clarify. I mean, I can go first or you can go first, Pal, whichever you...
Yeah, go ahead, Avi.
Yeah. So I, in principle, I don't have anything wrong with veganic organic farming. I don't think I have anything principle wrong with that. Unless we want, I mean, we can go down the rabbit hole of health and environment and yield and all of those things and labor required. But all of those things are really secondary to me from the ethical question. To me, the ethical question is the most important thing. The reason I say I take an anti-organic stance is because, practically speaking, when I go to the grocery store and there is a USDA organic certified stamp on whatever product I buy, the overwhelming majority of the cases, this is not coming from a veganic organic farming system. The overwhelming majority of the cases, this is just coming from an organic system. If I could know that the USDA organic stamp came from a veganic organic farm, I don't think I would really have an ethical problem with that. But practically speaking, when I purchase these products, it's not coming from veganic organic farming. It's coming from just the standard organic farming. And my understanding is that in the industry, veganic organic farming is more of a fringe practice. The overwhelming majority of the sector is taken up not by a veganic organic farming, but by a organic farming system that does use animal products. And am I mistaken on that?
No, I would say you're probably correct. I mean, organic in and of itself doesn't mean veganic at all. You're absolutely right there. And most organic farms that I know of do use animal inputs. So they use things like blood meal. They use like chicken feathers. They use obviously the manures, which in and of themselves, I would say would not be, non-vegan. If you're just looking at it as like, let's say in this magical world where, animals would just be pooping and somebody would be picking it up and using it as manure, that would be fine. But that's obviously not what's happening. They're being, used as, they're selling the waste product of the industry, which is already like, basically exploiting the animals horrifically. So yeah, like you're absolutely right in that summary.
Yeah, exactly. And I want to just stress how much I agree with the last thing you said there. It's, in principle, I don't have any problem with manure. I don't have a problem if something is in a forest, if an animal's in the forest and it defecates in a forest, I don't have a problem with a human taking a shovel and scooping it up after and using it for his farm. I don't have an ethical issue with that. What I have an ethical issue with is practically when I buy a USDA organic product, where that money goes. And where that money goes is the manure, which the conventional farming system uses. even if they keep the animals in cages and crates their entire life, even if they confine them their entire life and they have a tortuous existence and then they get slaughtered, instead of having to pay for the disposal of that manure, and I understand most of that manure goes to waste anyway. More manure goes to waste than it's actually used. However, they still have to pay for disposal fees, and sometimes they even get fined. Now, instead of having to pay those fines or pay for the process of disposing that manure, they get to sell it, basically. Yeah. So they get to decrease their production cost of their slaughter. They get to decrease the production cost of producing the meat, and all the horrific things that happen to the animals in between. And I don't want my money to go to that. The majority. So what about conventional then? Now, conventional farming does use manure too, but I ran the numbers on the split of synthetic fertilizer versus manure, and also human manure. So human manure, that is, or biosolids, that's another word for it, in which they take human manure and they use it. And there's a couple of things to be noted here. So the first thing is USDA organic standards ban human manure. They ban biosolids, sewage sludge. They put a complete kibosh on it. They don't allow it. And there may be a different organic standard that does allow this. But practically speaking, in where I live, it's based on, and everything I'm going off is based on USDA organic guidelines. So USDA organic guidelines does not allow human manure to be used. It also, but interestingly enough, what it does allow to be used is manure from conventional animals, even if they're eating GMO products. And I looked at, and I was shocked when I found this, because I thought originally some people think that, well, if it's an organic plant product, the manure had to come from an organic animal who was only fed organic products. And the USDA guidelines, when you look into that, they actually do allow for non-organic animal manure to be used, even if it was fed GMO things, and even if it was in a crate its entire life.
And probably consuming tons of antibiotics, for example.
Absolutely. Yep. Absolutely. And in fact, when you look at the data on manure that's used in organic farming, or when you look at the plant products from organic farming, the overall, so I looked at a meta-analysis on the E. coli contamination rates, and overall, there really isn't, from most of the studies, there isn't a statistically significant difference. But of the studies I've looked at in which there is a statistically significant difference, all I've seen is that there is a higher E. coli contamination rate in organic plant products. And the reason for this is not because there's something amazing about the way conventional farming is doing things. I think what this is just boiling down to is just the split of artificial fertilizer versus manure fertilizer. So I looked at the numbers per nitrogen, per millions of tons of nitrogen content where that goes into the plant and where it comes from. And it varies based on which continent you look at it. But in all cases, in all continents, the majority of nitrogen comes from synthetic fertilizer, not manure. The majority of manure actually goes to waste. The majority of and the split for the Americas specifically, it's about and this is for conventional plus organic farms, the split is about a 75-25% split per nitrogen content. So that's for organic plus conventional farms. If you isolated conventional farms, that split would even be greater, because if you look at the organic farms, they're not allowed to use synthetic fertilizers. So they're only allowed to use, and they're not allowed to use human manure either. So that leaves you with a few options. You can do veganic farming, or you can use manure and blood meal, bone broth, eggshells, feathers, all of those things.
Yeah.
And the majority so if you were to take that out, I would imagine the conventional farm split would be greater. So here's what everything comes down to for me, and here's the bottom line and the major ethical issue with me purchasing organic plant products. So the major issue for me is that I don't want my money to decrease the production cost, which is effectively increasing the demand for torturing animals and slaughtering animals. Now, if I had to choose practically between two options, one in which the majority of the fertilizer is not coming from a animal product, and the other option, which it's almost certainly going to be coming from an animal product, ethically speaking, I feel like I'm obligated to choose the one that's not coming from an animal product. And I would add that any of the other issues, such as we can talk about pesticides, we can talk about health, we can talk about antibiotics, we can talk about how good or bad the fertilizer is for the soil, the microbiomes, the nitrogen fixing microbes. We can talk about crusting. We can talk about all these problems, and we can talk about greenhouse gas emissions. We can talk about environmental problems. I can go through all of this, and I could contest a lot of the organic claims on this. But even if I grant all of these to be true on the organic side, what it needs to come down to for me is that the environmental harm would be so great and the health effects would be so great that I would be okay with being consistent and decreasing the production cost of trait equalized humans who are being slaughtered and tortured the same way. That's where, and what do you know what I mean when I say trait equalized?
No, I don't. Yeah, please clarify that.
Yeah. So basically, this is the name of the trait argument. So for example, if we take a human and we take a cow, and we ask, what is the morally relevant difference between a human and a cow? Someone might say, well, the morally relevant difference is intelligence. Let's do one example. Then I would say, okay, well, what about a human who is mentally handicapped and has the same intelligence or in the ballpark intelligence of a cow? Is there now a morally relevant difference between a human and a cow? Now, someone might say, okay, well, yeah, I mean, ability to experience well-being. So I would say, okay, well, what about a mentally handicapped human that somehow was only able to experience the same amount of well-being as a cow, right? What about suffering? So I would say the same thing. What about a mentally handicapped human who can only experience the same amount of suffering as a cow? So the idea is I continue to equalize these traits. Would I be consistent if instead of cows being slaughtered and tortured, instead of that, if there were trait equalized humans with the same sentience as a cow, the same ability to experience well-being as a cow, the same ability to experience suffering as a cow, would I conclude that because synthetic fertilizers might cause crusting on the earth, or synthetic fertilizers might have problems for species diversity of microbes, would I conclude, therefore, I should make the choice to decrease the production cost of trait equalized humans being tortured and slaughtered? Now, the answer to that, it could be a yes, but it would have, my bar for that would be very high. My bar, in order to be consistent, in order to have ethical consistency, I would have to bite the bullet on trait equalized humans. Now, one way around this, someone might say, well, humans inherently have a moral higher value than animals. And that is not persuasive to me, because to say that humans in and of itself have this high moral value, to me, it's about the consciousness itself, not the shell an individual is in. So if I took someone's consciousness and I put it in a sentient AI machine, I don't think it would be okay for me to smash the sentient AI machine. I think that would have moral value. It's not the shell that I think has moral value. It's the first person perspective, the consciousness, the ability to experience well-being and suffering that I place value on. So,
okay, I mean, I think I have a pretty clear understanding of what your position is. Did you want to say something else? Because I didn't mean to cut you off.
Yeah, just the main thing is that where this needs to land for me is whatever amount of benefit natural fertilizers that my money would go to when I buy a USDA organic product, I would need to take a consistent position and purchasing that, knowing that it would decrease the production cost of a trait equalized human being tortured and slaughtered. I would need to view the benefits to be so great and important that that's what I would do. That's where this needs to land for me.
Okay. Yeah, I'd like to kind of just say a few things. I mean, one is that before we even start, I just want to say that this is actually a pleasant surprise. I didn't know you were a vegan, for one. I really didn't know anything about you, so I hadn't actually seen any of your videos. So this is actually kind of a pleasant thing. I think we do agree on a lot of things already. So in some ways, I think we could just say like veganic farming would be the best, and we'd both be in agreement. And the conversation we could just end it now. Thanks everybody for the stream. Like we're done. So no, but in all honesty, like I think we do agree on a ton of stuff. I think I would just want to clarify some of the things that you said, and kind of ask some questions that go kind of hand in hand with this. So in my view, like buying a organic produce that may or may not have had, let's just say for the sake of argument, it does have manure that was coming from like horrific factory abused animals. In my mind, it's still not a clear endorsement of that industry or of the processes that, you know, led up to the manure, because in a way you're really not like intentionally, you know, giving them money like for the sake of like the for the manure. It's like it's a byproduct that they're selling. It's a waste product that they're selling. Obviously, they are making money off of it, and it does reduce their costs. But it's sort of like this: like there's a lot of like animal products that get used in a lot of industries where we kind of are forced to buy the product. So like people have pointed out to me, like usually anti-vegans who will say like, well, the laptop has like some kind of, you know, trace animal product in it or whatever. And it's like, I'm not buying the laptop to support the animal product industry. I'm buying the laptop to use it as a computer, et cetera, et cetera. Same thing with like a car or a phone or whatever. And this trace amount, the point isn't, you know, to get that like animal product. So if you're doing a garden and you're buying the manure directly, in a way, I think that's a lot more clear of what you're saying. And I would probably take your position. Like, I don't want to pay for animal manure, but to pay for fruit that was produced with that, it's definitely like, you know, one layer removed. And whether that's far enough or not, I don't really want to like argue that. I'm just saying, like, have you considered this idea extrapolated out to the other things like the laptop?
Absolutely. I've thought about exactly what you're saying in a lot of detail, because this is the pushback I've gotten anytime I bring this up a lot of times. So here's the bottom line, what I would say. First of all, anytime a waste product can be sold for a profit, I don't consider it a waste product anymore. I would make the same case for milk, or even meat. Like, for example, for dairy cows, the meat is actually the byproduct at that point. It's the milk that's really being used, and most of the money comes from the milk, and the meat is just the byproduct. Sometimes the meat is the byproduct, even in cows that are bred to be slaughtered, and the leather is really what they're making most of the money off of. So anytime a byproduct can be taken and sold for a profit, I just consider it a commodity. And as far as the practicality of things go, yeah, you're absolutely right. There are certain things that you can't avoid. There's like some, I think even in money, there may be some glue or certain gelatin in certain.
Yeah, in some countries, money. I think there was a big brouhaha in the UK recently because they were using like some kind of like beef, so like cow, like tallow or something, like beef fat.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, I think there's a very different circumstance here, though. So the difference is if there was two laptops, right, and one laptop, I would say there was about 20%. There was a 20% chance that I would be decreasing the production cost of slaughtering and torturing a human if I buy that laptop versus another laptop where there was a close to 90 or a 95% chance where I would be decreasing the production cost of a trait equalized human to be tortured and slaughtered. I think that's, and there's really, and whatever difference between the laptop, how good the laptop is, or the environmental impacts of the laptop, there needs to be a very strong difference between those two things for me to be consistent and say I would purchase the laptop where I had a 90 or 95% probability to decrease the production cost of torturing a human, even if it's unintentional, intentional, unintentional. At the end of the day, I need to be consistent for a trait equalized human and an animal. So I'm not going to say for the case of an animal, I'm just saying, well, that's okay because it's unintentional. I'm not intending to do it. I'm intending to just get the laptop. In the case of the human, would I be consistent and say the same thing? In the two situations where I could literally just go over one arm and I can move my arm the other way and buy the other laptop that has a much lower chance of decreasing the production cost of such a horrific thing. And as far as, well, we can get into the other stuff if there's other arguments too, but ultimately where it needs to land again for me is where all of these arguments, whether it's an extra step removed, whether it's, oh, you know, it's something that's unavoidable, which is not true because you can avoid it easily by buying the other product. You can avoid it to a certain great percentage degree by buying the other product. There's some amount of things that you can't avoid at all, but to some extent, or at least you can avoid things by just not getting things. We can talk about that and just like letting yourself die and not eating anything. There is
Right,
an
but I
ethical.
mean, that's not really what
Yeah.
veganism is
Well,
striving
well,
for. I mean,
well. Here's the thing, because there is a serious discussion about whether that is the right thing to do. Now, I think that's not the right thing to do. I want to be very clear that is not the right thing to do. But the reason why that's not the right thing to do is actually an important ethical discussion, and that is a discussion that I've had recently. But ultimately where this needs to land is all of the things, whatever context is being given. In a trait equalized human, I have to be consistent in making the same decision. That's where it needs to land for me. And for me, I think it's an easy way for me to say, practically speaking, unless it says veganic organic farming on it, practically speaking, when I see GMO or conventional farming versus USDA organic, and it doesn't say veganic organic, there is a great discrepancy between the chance of contribution to torturing an animal versus not, and I would have to make the same decision for a human. Trait equalization.
And I mean, I would actually really like to see the some of the stats. Logan did send me some of the links that you had sent him on the conventional nitrogen like usage versus the manure, because like you said, many farms would probably use both.
Yeah.
But by and large, I would have to agree with you that the stats show that in all the developed areas of the world, they are using more and more nitrogen, like from chemical sources. So basically, like petroleum-based nitrogen instead of the manure. So I would probably agree with you, just kind of intuitively. I haven't seen the data myself, so let's just go that is correct.
And just a quick thing, pal. Just a quick thing. So petroleum. So the whole thing about or synthetic fertilizers coming from the petroleum industry. So part of it depends specifically which ones you're talking about. So nitrogen based. So it depends if you're talking about urea based nitrogen or if you're talking about sodium nitrate based nitrogen or whatnot. So some of these things, some of the hydrogen may come from the petroleum industry, if I'm not mistaken, but the nitrogen itself comes from the Haber process to fixate nitrogen from atmospheric nitrogen, and natural gas is the hydrogen component. Now, I'm not sure of all the details on this, but it's been purported a lot that this comes from the petroleum industry. And from what I've seen, a lot of it, when you trace it back, a lot of it actually does not end up coming from the petroleum industry. I don't have all the numbers on it, but from what I'm looking at so far, a lot of that assumption, there's an implicit assumption in all of these discussions that it comes from the petroleum industry, and it's not necessarily the case. But that's a moot point.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think like you're absolutely right from an ethical standpoint. Even if one is coming from, the petroleum, it's like you can argue, like you said, like the environmental impact of that and how that affects, animals. Like you can have the Valdez spill and, talk about the animals that are killed when like oil wells are dug and they leak and, do all sorts of bad stuff. Or we had the big leak in the Gulf of Mexico, like recently, or a few years back. So yeah, we could argue that, but I agree with you that that is again like an accident or like not an intentional consequence. Whereas the farming with the manure is certainly kind of like that you're contributing to it inherently. It's part of the process. So yeah, I'll say like I would agree that yes, in this case, I guess I would concede that you're probably right. Like from an ethical point of view, you're probably harming fewer animals maybe by choosing the conventional versus the manure kind of grown food. Where I think I would disagree with you is the genetically modified stuff. I am very strongly opposed to GMO. I actually buy lots of stuff that's conventional, so things that are not organic. I used to try to buy a lot more organic when I was living in the US. I was living in Boston, and I would often go to Whole Foods and just try to buy everything organic whenever I could. But actually, since I've been living in Europe, it's been like really kind of difficult to get everything organic, or it's like ridiculously expensive. Like I'm willing, when I was buying organic, and this was well before I was vegan, and actually well before I was aware of any of these kind of like ethical implications of it. I was willing to pay, maybe like 1.5 times or maybe double the price to buy organic versus conventional. But like here in Europe, like sometimes the price difference can be as much as like, 4 to 5 times as much. And it's like, that's just like way too much. So even before I was vegan here, sorry, my camera's like trying to fall over. Even before I was vegan, I would have, like looked at that and just be like, no, I'm not doing it. And some of my concern with organic produce versus the conventional is always this idea of like the pesticides and chemical residues that may have been on the produce. And actually learning about kind of like bioaccumulation and having stopped eating animal products myself, I realized that, even if you do have some trace level of contamination on a conventional fruit that might be higher than organic, it's still not as big of an issue because most of our persistent organic pollutants that we're consuming, they come from animal fats. So I've seen data that shows and suggests that as much as 95% of the persistent organic compounds that we consume come from animal products. So if you just stop eating animal products, you're already cutting out 95% of the pollution that you would be consuming. So in that case, in my mind, it just became like, okay, well, it's not a big deal. Like, so there's no real difference. And I felt fine buying conventional. So I probably buy mostly, conventional versus organic. I buy very few things organic. I will say that I will actually think of this and consider it a little bit more. If I might just not buy any at this point, like, even if it's like similarly priced. But what I do want to say is that, stress that, I think like there are some other cases where the waste product is definitely not necessarily something that I would, I guess, like be that concerned about. Like, I think in a lot of processes, like the waste product is only being used because these industries are so heavily subsidized and because there's so much of this waste product that's available that they're able to sell this like byproduct as almost like virtually free, probably, because it's still better to make some profit on it, even if it's not much, versus having to dispose of it. So if you look at like bone char from the cattle industry, they use it to like refine things like sugar. So if you buy white sugar, depending on what company it is and whatever, there's a good chance that it's not fully vegan if you think about it, because they're using bone char to like bleach it and get it to be white. So there's stuff like that where, I think especially like if somebody's not aware of that and they're just buying like white sugar, they're in no way like intentionally like supporting the animal agriculture industry, even if it's been used to like clarify or bleach that product, because most people would never think that. Like, why on earth would you think that like buying sugar is like being filtered through like bone char? Like, most people would never think of that. So I wouldn't really be able to fault them for that. But I guess if then it is incumbent upon us to try and lessen that that impact. So like, I don't buy white sugar, for example. After I learned that, I was like, wow, that's like totally crazy. Like, why would I buy white sugar? So I buy either like unrefined sugar, and I use very little anyway, but I try to avoid that. So I think,
no, I agree. I don't buy with the white sugar either. Yeah, no, I completely agree with you. But keep going. There's things I would want to say, but I want to let you finish your point.
Okay. Yeah. So in these kind of like byproduct kind of things, I still think like, the bone char, like, I don't know how much they get for that stuff, but I can't imagine that, like nobody would do that as a business model. You would never rear animals to like kill them and get their bones and then like use that to make a product for like, bleaching sugar. So I guess like my main point that I want to make is that by going like vegan and encouraging people to go vegan, kind of, regardless of what, whether they're buying organic or non-organic, I think at some point the animal product industries will just be reduced gradually to the point that these other byproducts will go away as well, and it will be kind of like a moot point. And I guess that's where I want to kind of stop and let you address that.
Sure. So there's a number of, I'm trying to keep track of all the things I wanted to. So just starting from the last point. So yes, if we all went vegan, obviously this would be a moot point. That being said, at the end of the day, this would still happen faster. It would be a moot point a lot faster if, as people went vegan, they also didn't purchase manure from the animal agriculture industry. Now, as far as the subsidies go, yeah, absolutely. The government's subsidizing the animal agriculture industry. Yet at the same time, there is a difference. There's two things to consider here. Number one, being able to sell the manure and selling millions of tons of manure is going to make a difference and an impact. because of two reasons. One, they're still selling it for money. And two, if they were not to sell it for money, even if they were able to sell it for free, even if they were able to give it out for free and other people would pay to take it, that actually is still a decrease in production cost for them, because otherwise they would actually have to pay money of their own to dispose of it. Yeah. It's whenever you have waste product and like someone is willing to put their labor in to take your waste product for free, that's a benefit to you. And so on two levels, they're being able to sell it, and they're being able to not have to pay for their own waste disposal. So the bottom line is, even if we make all those arguments to try to lessen the blow, at the end of the day, when all is said and done, would you do this if they were trait equalized humans? Would you, if you had to choose between an organic and a non-organic plant product, and you knew, because most vegans don't know about this. Here's the thing, most vegans are unaware, and I'm not faulting vegans who are unaware of the situation that's happening right now. Most vegans are, when they buy organic products, they think they're doing a good thing. They think they don't know where that money is end up going for. But after you know about this, after you end up knowing what's actually happening behind the money, where the question is, would you do this if it were trait equalized humans? If they were humans who had the same ability to experience well-being and suffering as that of a cow, and you knew that they were being slaughtered in an agricultural industry, they were being raised in cages. Yeah. So
I think you're right. I mean, most people would hopefully not support that. They would be opposed to it. I would agree with that.
Yeah. Okay. And that's honestly, this is where it needs to land. And just to bring the point home, you can, if you were to, let's just say conventional was taken out of the equation. Let's say you had to choose between organic and GMO. All the bad things that GMO, I'm not saying GMO companies have done bad things. Like, I'll agree to that. Absolutely. I think Monsanto has done bad things to local farmers. No argument there. But the question at the end of the day is, in a hypothetical world where you had to choose between an industry that was highly probable to torture and slaughter trait equalized humans versus an industry that is going to be doing bad things to local farmers on the legal level and other bad things, which one would I say is worse? And I could never bring myself to, if hypothetically I had to choose between organic and GMO, I could never bring myself to choose the organic product, knowing that this is going to go to farmed, raped, tortured, put in gestation crates, trait equalized humans, versus the problems that GMOs have faced and have done. And I just don't see how one could argue one is ethically better than the other.
Well, I think that would be like a little bit simplifying kind of the problems with GMO, because I think they do harm humans directly. I think it's not just like, oh, they harm the farmers or harm their bottom line or take away their freedom to farm and how they want, or, using the seeds that they want, because there have been a lot of those things. Absolutely. But it goes beyond that. I mean, I think there's several health ramifications that, directly contribute to illnesses in people. They definitely use more like cancer causing, chemicals and pesticides and herbicides. So they are harming other, animals as well. So not just humans, but I would definitely, argue that, like, I would not support the GMO versus the organic.
So just to be clear, pal, just to be clear, do you think these harms that for GMOs are, because this is ultimately where it needs to land, do you think the harms that GMOs are causing, the external harms, the externalities, are so great and so large and so horrific that you would bite the bullet on, if they weren't animals, if they were humans in the agricultural industry who were being put in gestation crates and being slaughtered, you had to pick between organic and GMO, you think the GMO externalities compared to the organic externality difference is so great that you would say, let's decrease the production cost. I know I'm going to do this, and I know it's going to decrease the production cost of taking humans and trait equalized humans, torturing them and slaughtering them, because I believe the difference in the externalities of GMO and organic are so great that it's worth it. That's where it needs to land.
Based on what I know, yes, because for the GMOs, they're tested on animals. So there's like tons and tons of animal testing that gets done to kind of like approve things. So there's that component as well. There's, like I said, direct health impact to people. So, We don't even really know what kind of like health problems people might be facing as as a result of eating these kinds of things. There are lots of things where the like the pollution and the runoff from these heavily like what do you call it, like treated with like pesticides and herbicides and stuff like that. Like that stuff runs off directly. It harms people directly, and it harms animals directly as well. So like, in there is an inherent harm to people and animals as well. Whereas the other one, it's not intentional. It is there, I agree, but it's not like, so the intent matters too. Like one of them, the intent is almost like, you're just wanting to grow like fruits and veggies, and you're using like a byproduct of the animal agriculture industry. And the other one, it's like you're using the product of an industry that directly tests on animals and causes health problems and harms people like directly as well. So it's like you're harming the animals and the people.
Well, this needs to really be quantified, right? I mean, because yeah, I mean, GMOs have been tested on animals, but then on the other hand, organic agricultural products, they on the daily basis torture animals and they slaughter animals on the daily basis. So you'd have to really quantify and look at the numbers to see which one does worse, even if you want to come at it from a purely consequentialist framework. And then the other thing is you'd have to do the same thing for the health. Saying like, okay, so there's no long-term studies on eating GMO products. That doesn't at least get me to where I would say, okay, well, the harm is so great for humans. It just says we don't know. As far as pesticides go, again, we have to make the same quantification. We have to look at the LD50s and we have to look at the amount that's on the plant products of the residues for the GMO pesticides versus the organic pesticides. And we have to also look at the long-term data to see whether that actually makes a difference or whether there is a difference at all. From what I've seen in the meta-analyses, from the annals of from the journal Annals of Internal Medicine, that based on everything we know and all the studies we've looked at, we don't know the answer to this. Now that just means to me that we don't know. It could be anything, but it doesn't get me to conclude. I'm not going to conclude that I'm going to speculate one way or the other way when I know right now, at the end of the day, I know right now that when I buy an organic plant product, where my money is going to go way more likely to go to the literal torture and slaughter of a being with consciousness. And there may be and as far as the environmental externalities, I would have to say we need to do the same quantification. So there are some pesticides, I'm sure you know, that are used not as frequently, but when they were used, and they're actually approved again now. So rotenone would be an example of this. That's an organic pesticide that it's probably the most piscitoxic pesticide that's ever been used in organic farming, and more piscitoxic to the fish than any pesticide that's been used. Even it's on the level LD50 of DDT, and it does bioaccumulate. It gets into the birds as well. So we have to compare, we have to quantify and compare the two things. And at the end of the day, all these things need to add up to me knowing right now, even though I'm going to have a drastic percentage difference to decreasing the production cost of a being that's going to be tortured and slaughtered, multiple beings that are going to be tortured and slaughtered as an industry that's continuously doing it, not just having tested it on the past or testing on now, but having a massive millions of beings that are being slaughtered and tortured, that if we decide to do this as a people, that one would outweigh the other. And if we don't know the answer to that, that's not evidence to me that one would outweigh the other. It just means we don't know. So we actually need to look at the data. We need to look at the meta-analyses. We need to do the math. And that's the case that needs to be made. And the line needs to be drawn on what would outweigh the other. Now, you can take ethically two stances on this. You can take a pure consequentialist stance, which would say, okay, whatever causes more suffering or more well-being would win out. The other stance, the stance I take actually, is my ethical view is not a pure consequentialist view. I don't think that everything in any case always will reduce to more torturing and more slaughtering and well-being to suffering ratio. So for example, in the trolley problem, would I kill one person to save 5 people? My answer is no, and I would give the same answer for organ theft. I don't think that if we can take one person and kill them to save 2 or 3 people by harvesting their organs, I don't think I would bite the bullet on that. at a base level, I have two axioms. I have a deontologic axiom, and then I have a consequentialist axiom. The deontologic axiom is a concern for self-interest, and it's basically negative rights. I think that at the base level, negative rights would win out. The right to not directly harm other people, the right to not be harmed, and I would extend that to animals as well. At some point, though, I would switch over. So at some point, if I was asked, would I kill one person to save 1 million people? At some point, I would switch over. The consequences, if we have a consequentialist axiom, the consequences would weigh out. So for me, where it needs to land, and if you have any questions, I have actually graphed out my moral theory and my moral outline. If you'd like to see it, I can share with you. But where it needs to land for me, if you at the base level value negative rights, and at the base level and at the extended you value the consequentialism that can trump the negative rights, it needs to land for me that the difference would be so great that I would basically bite the bullet on paying. It's basically, for me, it's knowing that I'm, even if it's not intentional, knowing that I'm basically paying a hitman a certain percentage of the fee to kill a being or to torture a being. So
okay, there's a lot to cover here. I mean, one thing that I just want to say, with these kind of like theoretical situations, like the trolley or the one person for 1 million people, all these kinds of things, they're wonderful kind of thought experiments. But like at the end of the day, let's be realistic. I mean, that's just, like I just don't see that ever happening, right? Like that's such an extreme thing. Like the trolley experiment, like I don't even know the details of how that works, but like I get what you're saying. Kill one person to save the 5. When it's small numbers like that, I think I can kind of it's easier for me to think how that could potentially become like an interesting scenario. But in my mind, it's very limited. Like I can't possibly imagine a scenario where you could kill one person and save 1 million. Like I just can't imagine a scenario like that ever existing. So it's really just like a thought exercise at this point. It's not really like a real discussion of ethics in any way in my mind.
Well, I have to just, I'm sorry to jump in there, but this is extremely important, and I really have to jump in, because so the realistic nature of a hypothetical is irrelevant. How real, I don't care if it'll happen, I don't care if it'll ever will happen, I don't care if it'll never happen in any universe. That's actually not the point. The point is that in order to have an ethical system, it needs to be logically consistent. The hypothetical is there to test for logical consistency. It's not there to posit that these things might happen, and then what if these things happened and didn't happen? So the issue is, does your ethical system run into a contradiction either in realistic areas or unrealistic areas? And in philosophy, there's a principle of explosion, where if you have any contradiction, whether it's in a realistic case or an unrealistic case, whether it's in a hypothetical that's realistic and it's going to happen tomorrow, or if it's never going to happen ever, an internal contradiction in your ethical system causes a principle of explosion, which makes your entire system logically contradictory and useless.
Yeah, Avi, I think you misunderstood me. What I said is, like, it's interesting to talk about these hypotheticals. I'm just saying that, like, in reality, like, let's be realistic that none of these really apply to this argument in the GMO versus the conventional, or the organic. And my point is this, like, your stance is actually, don't you think that that's a little bit contradictory, what you said, that you stand on one side, but then at some point it shifts over? Like, why is it different to kill one person to save 1 million versus one to save 5?
Okay, so two things. So the relevance is not whether it would happen or not, whether the relevance is, am I applying a meta-ethical framework consistently?
No, I understand that. Yeah. I'm just asking you. So are you being consistent by changing your stance?
Absolutely. No. So absolutely. So basically, my system has two axioms in it. So it has a deontologic axiom, and it has a consequentialist axiom. And the trade-off point is based on the well-being to suffering ratio produced by an action. So my consistency, I would say I would be consistent in whether it's an animal. I would have the same. My meta-ethical system would have the same answer as if it was an animal, and it would have the same answer as if it was a human. My system contains two axioms, and the valuation changes based on the well-being to suffering. It's all based on principles. I'm not just walking around saying, oh, I prefer this in one case, I prefer this in another case. I would say if there was the same well-being to suffering ratio trade-off in the animal context, I would give an answer, and my answer would be the same in the trait equalized human context. So absolutely, I would be consistent.
No, that's fine, but I'm not talking about the animal versus the people. I'm saying like people in general, like you just said to kill one person to save 5 versus kill one person to save 1,000,000. And you're saying that that's consistent, but I'm saying I don't understand how you think that's consistent.
Well, it's
I wouldn't
consistent
be able to do it. I mean, if so, this is like the classic like James Bond movie, whatever, where the bad guy's like, okay, you have to kill your mother so that you can save the rest of your family, and then you have like your father and your brother and your sister and your dog or something, and like you're gonna do that, like, or you're not gonna do that, right? Because you don't think it's worth it, and then but then you would do it if it's 1,000,000 people, like.
So
like,
that
you'd be able to do it?
that, yeah, you can constructure that absolutely consistently. There's a way of doing it. So the way to understand this is at the base level, all principles or moral principles are axioms, and they are unjustified. The reason they cannot be justified is because any justification would require a future justification, a further justification ad infinitum. So if I say, why is well-being even important? Why is suffering even important? At some point, you just have to accept that it is. And there's no way around it. You can't make another argument to justify why suffering is wrong or why well-being is right. You can say in any argument you would make, I could say, okay, well, why is that wrong or why is that right? And that's just going to go in ad infinitum. So this is an issue in philosophy known as the Munchausen's trilemma. And there are several ways in which there are 3 ways in which justification has been tried to be used. And one of the feats of the trilemma have been just to bootstrap it as an axiom. And that's probably the most convincing thing. At some point, you just have to bootstrap it as an axiom. So even saying, it's important to note here, even saying well-being is good and suffering is bad, that is an axiom. And I have another axiom. That is one of my axioms, but I have another axiom that needs to be considered in my metaethical framework, which is the negative deontological rights. And in some cases, even positive deontological rights. So for example, to be consistent, it's very simple. So let's say, hypothetically, I just use these numbers. So I say the deontological axiom that I hold, murder has a negative value of minus 10,000. Let's just use that as a number. I'm not saying that's my number. I don't actually have, there's a gray area in what my number is, but let's just say I say it has a negative deontological value of minus 10,000, right? So and then I say the consequences of something dying externally of my murdering it as an externality would be 1, or being saved. The consequences of someone being saved would be 1. Then my trade-off point for the trolley problem would be 1,000 people. The morally neutral point would be, well, if 1,000 people are going to be saved, based on how my metaethical system is framed, the consistent answer would be, I'm not going to kill for 100. I'm not going to kill to save 200. I'm not going to kill to save 300. But I am going to kill to save 10,001. That would be the trade-off point, because the morally neutral point would be killing 1 to save 10,000. So within that system, all those answers would be consistent based on how that system is structured. Now, if you want to ask, well, how are you structuring the system? The answer is it has to be arbitrarily, and by arbitrary, I mean philosophically not justified, just like any other axiom is philosophically unjustified.
And what about something just like as simple as the golden rule? You're not going to kill the 1 person to save the 5 because you wouldn't want to be the 1 person. I mean, how does that not also hold consistently for the 1,000,000?
So the pragmatics of the golden rule has to deal with pragmatics. So if I even knew hypothetically that I could never be killed, let's say hypothetically you knew that you would just be invulnerable to everything. So the golden rule could never apply to you in this situation, because the concern for you not being killed is just an irrelevant thing, because let's say you just found out you were immortal. I would give the same answers. My answers wouldn't change, because like the golden rule for me would break down and say, okay, well, does the golden rule not apply now? Is it okay for you to kill people even if you're immortal? Because you know that no one else would ever be able to kill you? That's not where I structure my morality.
No, because that's not how the golden rule works. The golden rule doesn't work by you thinking that you're not going to have that happen to you. The golden rule is specifically using empathy to imagine yourself in the situation.
I see what you're saying. Yeah.
It doesn't really matter. It doesn't really matter whether it could happen to you or not.
Yeah.
And again, the probability isn't even that. It's just like you wouldn't want to be killed. Like I wouldn't want to be killed. I wouldn't be okay with somebody killing me to save 1,000,000 people. I wouldn't be okay with somebody killing me to save the whole planet. 8 billion people.
So I would answer no. I would be consistent there too. So I would say, if someone wanted to kill me to save 5 people, I would say no. But if there was 1 million people that needed to be saved and I needed to die for it, I would view that it would be ethically justified to kill me.
Yeah, see, I wouldn't.
Well, I mean, I can keep scaling that up then. I mean, what if there was...
I literally said every person on Earth. I said 8 billion people.
What if we can go for more than that? We can say, let's say hypothetically, there was a galaxy of Earths, and let's say there was a whole universe of Earths.
There's no number that you can say that I would be okay with them killing.
Whoa, pal, conscientious omnivore. Hold on. Wait a minute. Hold on. So just to be clear, if there was a universe of people that were going to be tortured to death, an entire universe of people that were being tortured, they were going to all die a tortuous death. And the only way for a universe of people.
Yeah, a universe of universes. Yeah.
Multiverse of people.
I still wouldn't give myself to be killed for that.
Pal, come on.
I'm dead serious. Yeah.
Really?
And again, I think this kind of goes back to this kind of just like, it's not really... Like, I understand what you said about the hypotheticals not being based on the value of the hypothetical is not based on the probability of it. But it's just like, you can't even describe to me this hypothetical of how that would work. Like, it's so generic that like you can't even describe how that could possibly happen. So it's not a question of probability. You haven't even described the situation.
I don't think I need. So again, that's just when you say I haven't described how it would work, I don't think I need to explain the mechanisms of how it would work as long as you know what the outcomes would be for each choice. That's the bottom line. To me, that's an irrelevancy. The point is.
I think that's very like critical. I mean, I think it does matter, like how it would work. Like, again, it's not a question of.
What do you mean it matters how it would work? Like, so for example, let's just say I was able to. So let's say, for example, you knew you could press one button and you would torture.
I'm an engineer by education.
No,
so
I
want
understand
to know what the button is doing. It doesn't work for me. This kind of stuff, like
okay, but hold on,
it doesn't.
Okay, pal, but pal, hold on. But let's just say that you didn't know how the button worked. And I know that's going to bother you. You're an engineer. You're going to hate this. The button's not going to work. But you don't know how the button works. But let's just say there was like a super genius engineer that came over to you and was like, I've engineered a button that when you press it, millions of people are going to be tortured to death. I'm not going to tell you my blueprints. I'm not sharing any of that information with you. You don't know. I'm not going to tell you how it is. All I'm asking you is it morally wrong for me to press the button? Is it morally wrong for you to press the button?
Of course. I mean, if I wouldn't push the button. Of course.
Yeah. So the fact that you didn't know how the button worked has nothing to do with the ethical consistency of your position. Has nothing to do with your ethical answers. Even if you don't know how the hypothetical works, you would still say, well, yeah, I don't know how it works, but I know if one choice leads to this outcome, I think that's a wrong thing, right?
Yes. Okay, that's correct.
Right. And so in this case too, if you didn't know how it worked, but you knew that the only way to save a multiverse of people from being tortured to death was for your own death to happen, my answer would be, just because I don't know how this is working, if that really was the case, then I would say it would be ethically justified to end my life to save a multiverse of people.
Well, but listen to what you just said. I mean, you said that that's the case.
I didn't yet, but there's a difference between knowing it's the case and knowing how it's the case. So I'm saying I know it's the case, but I don't know how it's the case.
I'll give you a better scenario. Have you ever seen the movie Cube?
No.
Okay, it's a horror movie. Anyway, these people wake up in a cube, and it's like all sorts of like dangerous torture puzzles of they're trying to escape and get out, and they don't know why they're there, and they can barely remember anything about their lives, etc., etc. Anyway, it's this weird like horror movie. So let's go with something similar to your story. You find yourself, you wake up in a room, you've been, drugged and mugged, like taken off the street when you're walking home or something. You wake up in this room, no windows, no doors, no nothing. And a voice comes over the loudspeaker from the room that says, yeah, there's this button. And if you push that, it's going to kill 15 people in the next room over. They show you a screen and you can see the 15 people, over there. And then they turn off the screen, and then nothing happens, and you're sitting around waiting. Then all of a sudden, you're passed out cold again. You wake up, and there's another person sitting next to you. They've told you the thing about the button, and you wake up, and the other person is like just about to like push the button. And what do? Do you go and like try to kill that person?
Yeah,
Like,
so you're giving a
kind of
scenario
like,
where, you're giving a scenario where you don't know if that's going to actually produce the outcome, right?
well, in your scenario too, somebody's told you.
I would say, so hypothetically.
You said somebody told you.
Okay, so let's just say.
This is the same thing, though. I mean, like,
but this is
how
not.
do you know? Because somebody told you, and you.
No, I
understand.
I've got
a bridge to sell you.
I
it's the
understand.
Golden Gate. It's beautiful.
Listen, so I understand what you're saying. So let's just change the hypothetical to say somehow you developed omniscience right now. God himself came to you, revealed himself to you. I mean, I'm using the point I'm getting with these hypotheticals is that let's just say for whatever reason you actually happen to know this. Let's say God himself came to you, an omniscient being came to you and said, listen, this is really what's going to happen. If you don't die, a multiverse of people are going to be tortured for years and years and years, and then they're all going to die. Let's just say you knew. Let's just say, because no, I mean, and I want this, and I'm going to keep rounding back here because I really want to get to the heart of the issue, and that really is the heart of the issue. All of these attempts to inject pragmatics about whether we know something or we're not going to know something, to me, those are all pragmatic injections into the principled point. So there's a principled point, and then there's the pragmatics that can change our answer. So what I'm doing is I'm taking away all the pragmatics. One of the pragmatics is, do we really know what would happen in that hypothetical? So I'm taking away that pragmatic too. Down to the principle. If it just so happened to be you really did know that was the case, would you really say, no, I want to live and let all of those people in all the multiverse be tortured to death?
Yeah, I mean, you're putting it into a way that like makes it hard to say no. So it's kind of like, I mean, why do we have heroes, right? Like, why do we have somebody who's willing to run into a burning building to save a kid or a dog, even just something like that? Like, they're willing to risk their life for somebody else, and sometimes they do die, like saving other people. That happens often, and those people have done it even just for one life, or even just the life of an animal, which is like really kind of noble. So like, yeah, I guess like if you really truly knew that, then yeah, you would give yourself, I mean, or most people probably would, because I think there are more heroes than not, I would say. I think sometimes it's just those extraordinary situations that bring out heroism in people. So, I mean, you're painting it in a way that it's hard to say no, because, I mean, you really just kind of come off seeming like all you care about is yourself. But again, like, I don't think this is a really good, I just don't find this to be productive. Like, this isn't really a question of like ethics or whatever. Like, if you were, omnipotent or like you just knew all this stuff and whatever, I mean, you could just talk to God and be like, well, just why are you doing this situation? I mean, it's like, it's not even a question of like the pragmatic part of it. It's just, it's an absurd hypothetical. Like when you talk about like hypotheticals, like, when people like the meat eaters get offended when vegans talk about like the aliens coming down and blah, blah, blah. Like those situations are far less like, absurd than the one you're describing. Like I just don't find it to be really helpful. Like, and we've gotten really far off track from like where we were talking about. Like,
I understand, but it is not only helpful in my view, but it's actually crucial. And the reason, even if it's a quote unquote absurd hypothetical, the reason I consider it to be crucial is because it establishes what the principle is in our ethical frameworks. And a lot of times the principle in our ethical frameworks can be very cloudy because of the pragmatics. And if you want to say it's not comparable because of the pragmatics, that's fine, but the pragmatics still need to be working from what your principles are. The principle is the core. The principle is the key. The principle is everything. And the pragmatics are just things that can vary. They're the particulars. The particulars can vary. They can be true or false. And all of those pragmatics would have to tie back into the principle. And what is the important thing, even in discussing GMOs versus organic, is how you're looking at it from your ethical framework and what your ethical framework is in principle. Now, and they would generate different answers. So for example, let's say in principle, someone has a pure consequentialist framework. His answer would be, well, if you look at the amount of torture and suffering buying an organic plant product does compared to the amount of torturing and suffering buying one GMO product does, you comparing the same product, which one causes more suffering or well-being? That's all they would answer, and they would give that answer. If someone takes my framework, which is a polyaxiomatic moral system or a plural intuitivist ethical system, well, actually not plural intuitivist, a pluralist ethical system, in which you have deontological and consequentialist axioms, my answer would, in principle, I would generate different answers. In principle, I would say, well, to the same degree that I would kill one to save X amount of people, I would have to say, I would kill X amount of animals by buying this amount of organic plant product. And in order for me to switch, what needs to be shown is that buying a GMO product, I would say I would buy the GMO product over the organic product. And in order for me to switch to the same number that I would have to switch in the other case, in the trolley problem, I would have to switch in the organic case and in the GMO case. So the GMO case would have to, yeah. So the point is that the ethical systems generate different answers in the different pragmatics. So it's important that I'm getting to the heart of your ethical system, because I want to know in principle what the answers it would generate is, and then we can go to the pragmatics of, okay, well, let's see what the pesticides are, and let's see what the health effects are, and then let's see what the environmental effects are of all of these things, and let's see what the toxins are, and the yield is, and the cost is, and all of these things we can try to get at. These are all the pragmatic calculations, but that doesn't give me any useful information if I don't know what your principle is at core. And
my principle, I don't do the number. So I'm not the consequential, mindset. So I don't really worry as like, okay, the GMO is going to harm more number of animals or whatever. Like basically my stance against the GMO is that I find it to be unnecessary. I think it's profit driven. I don't think there's any actual benefit. I have studied it a little bit, and basically everything I've seen is that anything that's reported as far as an actual benefit, it's all self-reported, like industry-funded studies. And even among those studies, they really struggle to be able to show anything statistically significant. So there's been a really great set of videos I've seen on it. I've done a lot of reading. All the studies I've seen, they are basically either like just barely like marginally significant or not at all, or they have like 4 or 5 studies and like 4 of them will be statistically insignificant, and 1 of them will show like a marginal benefit that is statistically significant. And then there's also a whole bunch of problems. Like I said, they do test on animals. There are also lots of animal studies that showed that even within rats and stuff, they cause like health problems 2, 3, 4, 5 generations down the line. So there's a lot of things like that would lead me to think that it would cause problems in humans, but it's just taking longer for some of those problems to come out. So I think, I look at it as not just like the number of the animals being killed by the GMO stuff. It's like the way I look at it is just as simple as this. Like they are killing animals through the testing, through the application of the pesticides and the herbicides. So you could say that part is the same as for the organic, and really any agriculture, because they are still trying to kill them. It's just they use different methods. So like in organic farming, they still use pesticides. They still use herbicides. They just try to use things that are natural, that are approved for use in the organic scheme. So they might use, copper spraying instead for things like on grapes or whatever, instead of using some kind of like chemical that's like, a Roundup or whatever, like, not Roundup, glyphosate or whatever. So they are still doing things to kill animals, to kill other plants, and all this kind of stuff. They both have this impact on the environment. I don't look at it as like one of them is a greater impact or lower impact on the environment. I'm looking at it as just like they're both killing animals. And then on top of it, I think the GMO part is actually dangerous to humans as well. And that's why I'm opposed to it.
Well, so the thing is that there is a disanalogy in terms of the organic and the GMO, even in those two things. I mean, the at least to me, what it seems like when I buy an organic product versus a GMO product, I know that there is a perpetual slaughter that's happening. It's happening on a mass scale. There's a perpetual torture and slaughter that's happening on a very, very wide scale. I'm not talking about some few labs that are testing. I'm talking about there's a whole industry that is slaughtering millions of animals, millions of conscious beings. And if I buy a product where I know that manure is coming, or at least almost certainly likely to come from that, and decrease the production cost of that, that's got to be a really bad thing. And to make the case that the GMO products, what their outcomes are going to be worse, I need to see evidence for that. And I need to see evidence that it's definitely worse for humans, and not just worse for humans, but the degree of harm that it would cause for humans is so great that it would outweigh whatever deontological harm I'm doing by purchasing something where there is an asymmetry. I'm not talking about testing it on a small scale. There's a mass.
Yeah, I get what you're saying. I mean, you're saying there's millions and millions and
Sure, that's happening.
Oh, sorry. I think you actually froze up, and I was talking.
Yeah, sure.
Can you just repeat what you just said, like maybe the last 2 sentences?
Yeah. So at the end of the day, where it needs to be for me is I see an asymmetry between organic and GMOs. The asymmetry I see is that when I buy organic plant products, I am very likely to contribute to massive slaughters, an industry that is slaughtering things on a massive level. When I buy GMO products, I do not see that I am likely to be contributing to an industry that is confining, torturing, and slaughtering beings on a massive level. That's the asymmetry I see. Now, I need that asymmetry. For me to change my opinion, I need to see that asymmetry be broken. I need to see that what I'm doing, I'm funding an industry that is confining, torturing, and slaughtering beings on a massive scale. When I buy a GMO plant product, that's the asymmetry for me that needs to be broken.
Okay, I get your position. I mean, I would go back to kind of what I said at the beginning. Like, thankfully, I think we're in agreement on the vast majority of things here. So I think just practically speaking, thankfully, we are not in the situation of having to choose only between organic and only between GMO. I mean, you could pick the conventional, and most things, let's be realistic, are non-GMO, and they are conventional. So this is really kind of like a thought exercise at this point. Like, you can just easily live off of just fully conventional vegetables and veggies and fruits and whatever. So this is really just a thought exercise. So yeah, I guess I get what you're saying. I don't have the numbers on, the numbers of animals, say, being like tested for this stuff. I will concede that it's very likely, most likely, to be far, far less than the millions and millions of animals killed every day or every year or whatever for the animal agriculture industry. So I would concede that. And again, I think the information on the potential for harm for humans and for the other animals in the environment, so the animals that are getting harmed by the pesticides and the runoff and all this kind of stuff, I would need to really get more numbers on that. I don't know that, but as far as the danger to humans, I think I didn't prepare well enough for that part of the discussion today. I'm happy to send you some links and some information that I've looked through in the past that will give you some idea of why I'm saying that. But I don't really, I wouldn't be able to quantify that, like, oh, it's going to result in this many human deaths or this many human cancers, or I don't know that stuff. And I certainly don't have that kind of prepared for today. So.
Right. Okay, that's fine. And we could pick this up at a later date if you'd like. But the point, so at this juncture, I think what we can both agree on is that with the level of fringeness that veganic organic farming is, when you go to the grocery store, it is better to buy a conventional plant product than an organic plant product, ethically speaking.
I would say that you've made a really compelling case. I'm going to still consider it, but for right now, I would say I would agree with you. Like, you've made a good case for that. Like, I'm going to think about it some more because honestly, I have never thought about it specifically the way you've framed it. But like right now, I would agree with that.
Okay, good. Yeah. And look, I mean, my allegiance is not to GMO. We can go through the data and the meta-analyses in GMO, and we can have that conversation at a later point when you're more prepared and you have more of your data. And I can share my data and we can get into that conversation. But the main point for me in this conversation, the main point I wanted to get across is that there is a huge problem in buying organic plant products. And even if you want to, and even if we don't want to, we want to take GM off the table as well. We can have that conversation, and
that's easy to do, right? I mean, we agree on that.
Absolutely.
Like, you don't need to buy GMO stuff. That's for sure.
You don't need to buy GMO stuff. Now, whether you can, and there's an exercise that hypothetically we did, if we didn't have conventional, we take organic and GMO and compare them to each other. What I see even in that case, the GMO would be favored over the organic ethically. But right now in the real world, it's most of the plant products are conventional, non-organic, non-GMO plant products.
Yeah.
So at the minimal thing I would say is that when you see a USDA organic, when you see an organic plant product and a non-GMO conventional plant product, to pick the non-GMO conventional plant product and not the organic plant product. That's the base at the very minimum.
Mm-hmm. And like you said, unless you know that it's from a veganic farm.
Yes, unless you know that it is from a veganic farm. Correct.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I would totally agree with that. Based on what I've considered right now and what you've laid out, I think it's a good argument.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, and so when we're more prepared, when you're more prepared on the data on GMOs, we can have that discussion. But this is, I'm glad we came to that conclusion. I'm glad you agree. This is the base, the main important thing that I wanted to get out there for vegans who genuinely care about ethics. So we can look at the data for GMOs. We can go through that whole thing, and that's fine for me. I'm willing to be persuaded based on the data. I don't have an allegiance to it. I have looked through a lot of studies. I've looked through a lot of meta-analyses that were not funded by the industry, and they do show conclusions that I seem to be convinced of. But I'm not dogmatic about it. I'm willing to.
Sure. I'll be happy to look at what you've seen too.
Yeah. And I would just hope that you would also take the same approach. That even though you're coming from a position of an anti-GMO, if I can show you meta-analyses that are not funded by the industry that do show a certain conclusion, that you wouldn't be dogmatic in your position either.
Yeah, I try not to be dogmatic about anything. I mean,
Okay.
you've already convinced me about this, so absolutely. I was not expecting to concede that. So I'm not being dogmatic. And I mean, just to summarize my position though too, is that thankfully, it isn't just those choices. I think we actually are empowered to do more and garden for ourselves. And if you look through my channel, I would say maybe a third of my videos are about gardening. And I'm encouraging everybody, if at all possible, even if you don't have a yard, if you just have a terrace, start growing some herbs and maybe some, little tomatoes or something. My position is the more we can grow food for ourselves using veganic methods, the better. So that's my position, that that's what I would encourage everybody to do.
Yeah, but understand that so for example, there are a lot of people also who don't even have a backyard. They for example, me, I'm surrounded by concrete. That's all I have. That's all I
totally
have.
get you. I mean, like I said, for you, your best bet is probably maybe you could grow some basil and some rosemary in a pot, in your kitchen or something. That's probably as far as you can go. So, but still do that. I mean, that's already a good step.
All right. Well, I'm glad we had this conversation, and then at some point later, if you would like, we can flesh out all the GMO data, and we could go down that rabbit hole.
I'm happy to talk about that more. Yeah.
Yeah. But for now, the key, I think the key point to raise for anyone watching is that if you are a vegan and you do genuinely care about ethics, unless you know it's from a veganic organic farm, to choose the conventional plant product in the grocery store over the organic plant product in the grocery store on the level of ethics.
Okay, Logan, do you want to kind of sum up, or say what you thought of the discussion?
Yeah, I just had a question too. So about in the future, right? There's a possibility that people will all they'll abolish animal agriculture, and then it'll be a moot point, right? But if people buy GMO instead, right? GMO. Like Monsanto, they try to put patents on pigs. There's all sorts of problems with the farmers, and then there's a bunch of issues with them. In the future, if we go that way, they're an unethical company, and especially if they're trying to put patents on pigs, obviously they're in favor of animal agriculture, right? So the future looks good for organic, but it looks bad for GMO. So right now I see Avi's point Abby's point about, it's bad right now, but considering the future, it looks better to go with organic. So what do you guys think about that?
Yeah, so I can
go first. Yeah.
So the response to that. So I mean, the first thing is the main ethical point that I wanted to bring home was not even for GMO, was for conventional farming, and conventional farming isn't patenting pigs. But as far as what I'm saying is, when you say the future looks good for organic, the future, right? If you purchase organic, it is contributing to to an increase in the animal slaughter. The point I want to bring up, the main thing I wanted to say to this is that when this is a general issue of when you have a company, when you have a conglomerate of that they own both animal agriculture and they own plant products. And so we can make a case. So let's say, for example, you go to a McDonald's and you buy a water bottle, right? Is that something that's ethically wrong? Well, you're contributing money to a industry that is based off animal products, but you're not actually buying an animal product. There's an asymmetry there. So is it ethically wrong what you did when you went to McDonald's and you bought a water bottle?
I wouldn't say that.
Yeah, I would argue no, right? I would say no. And here's why. So the reason is because when you buy a water bottle from McDonald's, you are not contributing economic demand. Even if you give money to McDonald's for the water bottle, at the end of the day, if not a lot of people are buying water bottles, what's going to happen is McDonald's will catch on and just sell more water bottles. McDonald's, they look at their itinerary. They're not idiots. They look at their numbers. They look at their books and they say, wow, a lot of people are buying water bottles now. Let's sell more water bottles. What they're not going to say is let's decrease our water bottle stocks and increase our hamburgers. That would be absurd. So I would say the same thing for any farming system. I would say the same thing for an organic farm system, a conventionally farm system, and a GMO farm system. If GMO companies are not stupid about their profits, they're not going to look. They're not going to see, oh well, we have a lot of vegans who are purchasing our plant products and they don't want manure there. And so the right thing for us to do is to not increase that. We'll just increase the pig production. At the end of the day, if a lot of people are switching over, Monsanto's going to do whatever there's an economic demand for them to do. They're a ruthless, vicious conglomerate. They're a company that wants money. And whatever the economic demand is what they will follow. And if the economic demand is to not sell pigs, they won't sell pigs. If the economic demand is to sell their GMO plant products, they'll sell their GMO plant products. And the same thing is true for an organic farm, and the same thing is true for a conventional farm. They will do what the economic demand is. They'll follow the money wherever it goes. So I would say that if you purchase, just like you purchase a water bottle in McDonald's, you're not doing something ethically wrong because they also own hamburgers. I would say the same thing applies to GMOs. If you purchase a GMO plant product, you're not doing something ethically wrong by the nature that they also patent pigs. And I would say the same thing for organic. Because you purchase an organic plant product, if the organic company also owned a factory farm, if they also owned a farm in which they were slaughtering pigs, I'm not saying you're going to do something wrong because that you're giving money to a company that also farms pigs. And I'd say the same thing about conventional. They're going to do whatever the money whatever the money is, they'll do what the economic demand is.
I would largely agree with Javi. The only point that I would argue is that by buying a GMO product, you are supporting a product that was tested on animals. So you could say the same thing about like a shampoo or a soap or chocolate, or not chocolate, but something that would be tested on animals. So so that's the only part that I would contest. And then the other thing that I would just add to that is that, I think what you will see more of is veganic farming. I think in the world that Logan described, where like more and more people go vegan, I think we will see more and more veganic options. You're already seeing people like Happy Healthy Vegan, where they're promoting, the farm in California that they go to. They did a whole video on it too, where they show like the guys are doing veganic farming. They're increasing their soil fertility. They're increasing their profits because they have less inputs that they have to pay for. They're able to charge a premium for their product because you have ethically minded people who are willing to pay more for that. So it's like once that starts building, it's like Avi said, like you'll get companies that just see that as a benefit and they'll just kind of keep following the money. So if that's what people are willing to put their money towards, that's what you're going to start seeing spread.
Yeah, and just to touch, so we'd have to look at the numbers on the animal testing, and I'd have to explore that in more detail, and I'd have to explore if there's any testing in the other plant products as well on any level, and if there's experimentation for the different pesticides they different use. I'm assuming, of course, there is, but I have to look at those numbers. And all I would say is that even in the animal testing cases, I don't think it would be, maybe you could make a case for that it would be better to buy conventional than GMO ethically. I don't think you would be able to make a case for is that if you had to choose hypothetically between GMO and organic, that you would choose organic, because whatever testing that happens, I'm sure that an industry that has a massive scale that's contributing to slaughtering massive amounts of beings would outweigh that by a huge degree. So I'd have to I'm open to looking at the numbers on these things and making an ethical judgment accordingly. Yeah, I mean, that's basically but the main point here, Logan, the main point is that the conglomerates go where the money goes. If you buy a water bottle, they'll sell water bottles. If you buy spinach, they'll sell spinach. That's the end. That's the basic one.
Yeah. So I get that. I get that idea. But like, just as far as companies go, like, if you look at, you have to kind of look at their character as well, right? Like, so, like I was watching, Happy Healthy Vegan is like a huge anti-GMO advocate, and same with John Joseph and all these other people. So I was watching some of their videos, and Ryan was saying that he made a video about they had a trial where Monsanto was on trial, and they brought up all these documents where Monsanto was ghostwriting their own studies. And they were also paying like an army of trolls. It was called the Let Nothing Go program. And they paid like an army of trolls to go, bash like all these, anti-GMO people. And then they're also like, they tried to sue companies and fight against like having their own products be labeled GMO and all these other things, right? So, I mean, if you have a good product, like, why would you be fighting against, trying to label it, what it is? Like, nobody else does that, nobody's trying to like, don't call this pizza or something, right? Like you see that with the plant milk people, and it's pretty shady where dairy's trying to have them not call it milk, right? And there's all these reasons behind it, right? So I'm not saying exactly what the reason is, but they just seem like overall there's just a crazy amount of shadiness. And I understand like organic, it is slaughtering animals, but like if we could just like do it in without doing that, then they would be beating Monsanto by a long shot.
Yeah, I mean, you could make the case that if buying organic plant products wasn't leading to the slaughter and torture of animals, then you could try to make the case, well, one company has a nasty character, another company doesn't have a nasty character. The degree of moral impact in this, I would say, is very minuscule compared to what's actually going on right now, though. The reality right now is that you actually are contributing to the slaughter of massive amounts of animals on a huge scale. And that moral weight should never be taken lightly in comparison to the characteristics or nature of a company. That's something that has a lot less moral weight to me than a literal massive farming and torturing and slaughtering of a massive scale of beings that can experience consciousness. We're talking about gyrencephalic mammals, not even like creatures that have like these very low degrees of sentience. I'm not even going to fish that has the brain the size of my pinky. We're talking about gyrencephalic mammals who are being, on the millions, confined their entire lives and being slaughtered. So that's where the focus of the discussion should be for now.
Yeah, I kind of agree with you, and I probably will buy, more GMO stuff like that in the future, or not GMO, but I'll try to buy not organic stuff in the future. But like, it would be interesting to quantify everything that Monsanto does and like the environment stuff, because I did see a lot of things about the environment too. Like Mexico had like a cornfields that were there for like 5,000 years. And Monsanto came in and took away their cornfields and planted their own GMO corn there, and it just completely destroyed the soil and just depleted the land and everything. So it's like there's huge things all across the world. And then there's an interesting like correlation too. I don't know if you've heard of this as a doctor, but they said the number one selling drug is Humira, right? And one of the things that it does is like it is for IBS and all these other symptoms. and all the symptoms are the same symptoms that like Roundup and these pesticides cause. So that was interesting to me.
Well, I'm going to push back on you on that. So Humira, no. So if you look at the LD50s for Roundup, the LD50 for Roundup is about, I think it's in the thousands. And if you compare that to other pesticides, even it's the LD50 is even higher than DDTs. And by the way, when I say higher, it means it's less toxic. The higher the LD50 is, the less toxicity to humans it is. And the reason Roundup is less toxic to humans than pesticides are because it's not even a pesticide, it's a herbicide, what Roundup is. It's made to inhibit a pathway that exists in plants that doesn't even exist in humans. The LD50 for mammals for Roundup is higher than any of the pesticides, and there's trace amounts. And there's no evidence that I've seen that at the levels that they're actually consumed, that it would have a harmful effect. Now, you can argue there needs to be more long-term studies, and that's fine. But what I would not make a comparison to inflammatory bowel disease or the other diseases where Humira can be used, such as like a patient who's covered in psoriasis all over their skin or eczema all over their skin, and their quality of life is just completely ruined, and they need this immunomodulator, Humira, to just have a normal quality of life. I would be very cautious about drawing that analogy because I don't see evidence that when you eat a plant product, that's basically what's going to happen to you. I think these are diseases that need to be taken seriously for what they are. They're disorders of the immune system. They have a genetic component and an environmental trigger component, like many other diseases, but they have drastic impacts on patients, and Humira can do a lot of good for those patients.
Yeah. So why I said that, like there is no outcome data, right? So neither one of us can like prove it or whatever. But Roundup basically makes stomachs explode and just destroys their nervous system, right? So if it's affecting their stomach, like you'd think of it as, obviously it affects animal stomachs. So that's what I'm thinking of. But also, like GMO uses, according to the USDA, uses 33% more herbicides than organic does. So they're using more of it. So if you just say like herbicides are bad, obviously more herbicides are worse, right, for the body. And then on top of that, they say now that Roundup doesn't even work. It's not even effective anymore. So now Monsanto switched to a new thing that has like similar properties to Agent Orange. There's tons of compounds in it that are the same as Agent Orange, and it's an even stronger herbicide that they're having to use now. So if you think about that, and it just keeps having to get stronger and stronger and stronger, that seems like a big issue as well.
Well, Logan,
it goes into the water supply as well too.
So Logan. So the key that there's a couple of things to say. So number one, when you're talking about stomachs exploding, I haven't seen evidence of any mammal stomach exploding on the amount of milligram per kilogram of Roundup. I've heard you mention insects before, and insects are probably the most disanalogous thing that you can ever extrapolate to a human. It's in fact that we use certain pesticides in insects because we know it works in insects, and it's not going to work in humans the same way it works in insects. So drawing that analogy to saying it's going to be bad for humans.
Well, I didn't claim that human stomachs explode. I claimed that it might cause irritable bowel syndrome, which is like, the tiniest stomach discomfort.
And we don't know.
So if you think about making the animal bigger, right? Yeah, but like I said, if there's no outcome data, you kind of have to look at what's secondary, like what's, kind of use your head and look about other things.
Logan, what's secondary is the LD50. Yeah, but we have mechanistic data on mammals. We don't have to go to insects. We have mechanistic data on mammals, and the mechanistic data on mammals does paint a picture that's more favorable to Roundup compared to other chemicals being used. And it's actually a higher LD50 compared to things like even DDT. It has a higher LD50 than DDT would have. Or actually, even the copper pesticides, it has a higher LD50 than copper pesticides. It has a higher LD50 than even some of the more benign, even organic pesticides that are being used. So even on that mechanistic level, I don't see evidence for Roundup to be bashed in that way. Obviously, if there's outcome data that shows that it does have a negative impact, then I would concede the point, and I'd be happy to concede that point. And we can go to a later juncture where we can look at the data and we can hash it out and flesh it out when when Pal has his data prepared and I have my data prepared with him, and we can have this discussion. At the end of the day, though, I would be, even on the mechanistic level, I don't think we can make this extrapolation. And there was another point that you mentioned that I forgot. I've lost my train of thought to respond to.
Well, just about water supply too. I was thinking, like, you know, if you're using more and more and more of pesticides and you're continuously using them and they're just going more and more into water supplies, like that's obviously bad as well.
So what you need to look at for on both of these sides. So like I said before, so remember that when I mentioned rotenone, so that's an organic pesticide that's used. They banned it and then they actually opened it back up. They actually just recently reapproved rotenone. And it's the most, if you're talking about things getting into the water, this is actually one of the most toxic pesticide that I've ever seen in terms of its toxicity to fish and its ability to bioaccumulate in birds. And that's just recently been reapproved for organic farming. So you'd have to look at the numbers and compare the two things against each other. You can't just assume one and not the other. And the other thing is, when you're talking about bioaccumulation, the ability of things to bioaccumulate depends on their half-life. So things that have low half-lives, they're not going to bioaccumulate as readily. Things that bioaccumulate generally have long half-lives. They last long in beings, and so that way, when a predator eats a prey, these compounds are still there. So the ideal pesticides and herbicides are pesticides and herbicides that have short half-lives. They break down into products that themselves are far less toxic or not toxic. That's what you need to look at. You need to look at half-lives, because if something has a short half-life, it's much less likely to bioaccumulate than something that has a long half-life. So you need to look at all of these compounds and judge them on an individual basis, and you need to look at the data from all of them. And this is just even on the mechanistic level. You need to look at all of these on an individual case. We can't speculate. We have to look at the data, even the mechanistic data.
Yeah, that's kind of the point of like what I'm just saying what I've researched, and then people can look more into it, you know, just from what I'm saying, and then hopefully they can compile like data and come to their own conclusion and stuff like that. It's really hard to have the numbers on every single thing and then compare this to that, especially when one's environmental and one's ethics and, you know, all these other things, right? You can't, like, it's hard to know the numbers, but I get your point about right now, you know, animals are being slaughtered for it right now. So right now it definitely does seem like you should buy more of the other products. The hard thing about buying like conventional and stuff like that is if GMO doesn't label their stuff GMO, it's really hard to tell what's what, right? Because
I think what I find is a lot when I go to my grocery store. A lot of times, what I see. So, for example, when I buy my soy milk, right? What I see is I'll see a line of soy milk, and I'll see almost all of them say GMO free, but one of the soy milks are going to say USDA organic. Right. So before I thought about this issue, what I used to say is, hey, I like the USDA organic. I'll buy the USDA organic soy milk. That has the non-GMO stamp, and it also has the USDA organic stamp. Right. And what I've come to the conclusion now is that all I need to do is buy the soy milk that has by the way, all of my soy milks, I actually don't have a GMO soy milk to even choose from. They all have the GMO free stamp. But the stamp that also says USDA organic, I just don't buy that one. I buy the conventional one. And I just remembered the other thing I wanted to respond to you with. So the amount of herbicides and pesticides GMO uses compared to conventional, compared to organic, is a contentious point. And I think it needs to be fleshed out in the data, because there are meta-analyses that have not been funded by the industry that I would say the opposite. But that's a conversation for a later junction. And I don't think it would be fair for me to start shooting out and chain gunning meta-analyses when Conscientious Omnivore has not prepared his material. So I'm going to be as charitable as I can and say that's a conversation to have at a later junction.
Yeah, so I think it did say that organic used more insecticide. So it wasn't like a biased thing. It said they used more insecticide and then GMO used more herbicide. So then it's hard to judge which one's worse, right? But one last thing. Well, two last things, actually. The Cube movie was awesome, okay? Cube 2 is even better. And the other thing, like, people say, like, GMO produces more food. And I don't think that's true. I think it's all, like, a money thing, like you were talking about earlier, because they have this thing, like, called terminated seed technology, right? Where they they sell the product, and then they sell it intentionally so it doesn't produce any more seed, so then they could sell more seed to the people. So if their whole platform is we want to feed the world and have, we're being, kind and feeding people, obviously they're not. And there's another thing too that I forgot. How it shows like they're not out to like feed more people, and it actually turns out like you can feed the same amount of people with other methods, and it's just all like a scam to sell this Roundup and everything like that. So that part to me is not true, that it's actually
Logan,
helping feed the world.
Yeah, Logan, I don't think any company is out there to feed the world. I don't think any company is free of greed, and any company is free of, and any company is just acting in this altruistic way, of course. And by the way, I would say the same things for organic companies. I don't think they're out there because they just care about making things healthier. At the end of the day, I think they're there to sell their product just the same way. I think every company is there to make money, and every company is there to follow the economic demand, and every company is there to, at the end of the day, make profit. If you're not there to do that, then you're not functioning as a company in an economic environment. So what I would say is, in terms of measuring how much food you're able to produce, the only way to do this is to look at the yield, crop yield, and how much that gets put into it, and look at the numbers. And that's, again, you're bringing me back to this point where I don't want to be uncharitable to Conscientious Omnivore, because I do have data on this. I do have meta-analyses that have not been funded on the industry on this, but I would like to do this at a later juncture where Conscientious Omnivore has his data, and we can look through each other's data. So I would also contest this with you as well, based on the highest levels of the evidence hierarchy, which is the meta-analyses, which also are not funded by the industry. But we can do it at a later juncture. To me, that's not even the interesting question. To me, the most interesting question is the ethical question, because at the end of the day, and I understand all these partake into the ethical question, but I think at this juncture, for me, the end of the day is what's right for me to do. And for me, the right thing to do is when I see an alternative to an organic product, to me, it seems like the ethical thing to do is to buy the alternative to the organic product, unless it's a veganic organic product.
Sounds good.
All right.
Good. And as a medical professional, how many genders would you say there are?
No, we're not gonna. No. We're not. Listen, you don't listen. I just try to get me to lose my job on this. I'm not touching these certain political issues. I'm not even gonna. No.
I'm just playing.
Not taking the bait, Logan.
Well, thanks for coming on and having this discussion. Anyways, it's a good time.
Yeah, for sure. I appreciate it. Thanks for being on, and definitely looking forward to discussing it further. And I think just kudos to your framing of the problem, because you really did kind of convince me of this. So I think if you watch any of my debates, I'm not easy to be convinced. So well done.
Yeah, so I thank you for having me on, Logan, and I appreciate you, Conscientious Omnivore, for taking the time to have this discussion. And I want to applaud you for your intellectual honesty. It's usually when I debate organic advocates, it's very hard for them to change their mind on the ethics of the situation. And there's a lot of dogmatism that happens in both areas. And it's very hard for different camps to have a reasonable conversation. And I feel like we were able to have a reasonable conversation. And I thank you. I just want to put out a thank you for not being dogmatic about the issue and being able to assess the situation and the ethical argument on its face value and being able to accept it. So thank you for your intellectual honesty. I applaud you for that.
Thank you. You're very welcome. Cool. All right, guys.
All right.
I guess.
Do we have any questions in the chat at all? Any questions? Are there any super chats or?
I'm actually not monetized, so I
actually had one more question. I didn't get to ask CO anything. I actually had a question about. You said you would kill a multiverse of people for yourself. I can't remember exactly what you said.
That's not what I said. So I wouldn't I wouldn't kill them. I just said that I wouldn't be putting myself forward to be killed to save them. That's
really. I don't know. Wow. Like how many, like millions and millions and billions, trillions. You wouldn't kill.
But
I think I would kill myself probably for like 3 babies or something. I think that would be my line. For
yeah,
like a
but
multiverse of
again,
people.
Logan, I think, I mean, I hope Avi got what I was kind of getting at. Like, my thing is that, like the problem itself hasn't been described well enough to convince me. And then he was talking about this kind of, thing of like, you just know it to be true and we don't need to know the details. So, and then I talked about heroism. So like, yes, I conceded that if it's like the actual case, like I did concede that, then I would, give my life to save all the other people, or even just like you said, like 3 babies. And that's why you get people going into the cold, icy river to pull out the one little kid, and then they die of hypothermia. Like, absolutely, yes. But
Mhm.
I just didn't like the phrasing of the situation. That's all. Like the way it was kind of like explained, I guess.
Alrighty, that's all I wanted to know. Thanks.
All right.
All right. Good talking.
Yeah, and there's just like so many chats that I literally can't tell if there are any questions because it's just like pages of scrolling here. So
if you want, you could just read the super chats.
I don't have any super chats because I'm not monetized. So
Oh, I gotcha. Okay.
yeah, I mean, it looks like there's going to be a lot of stuff in here. I'll try to read through this after the fact. I guess even right now, if somebody has any questions and they're willing to retype them, let's see. Ethan Jones says large corporate farming is very profitable. Well, yeah, that's true. Arnold Lane says sad world where you have to thank someone for being honest. I would agree with that. David, thanks a lot for being on. He says, I am a very reasonable person. I was a very reasonable person. I try to be. Let's see. Yeah.
Well, here's one thing too, like you're saying about like being honest and convincing somebody. I don't know why somebody would take the side of I want to pay more for organic food. Like if you can convince me that GMO is better, it's cheaper. I'm a cheap person. I would much rather spend less at the grocery store. So it's not going to be hard to convince me.
Or even conventional, not necessarily GMO, even conventional.
Yeah, I think it is an interesting thing. I mean, it's not necessarily about the money because usually I think what people are willing to pay more money for is that they think it's better, either for the environment or for their health. So that's what they're willing to pay more for. It's not like they want to. Well, I guess maybe there might be some people who want to kind of like put on a show and like look at how much money I paid for something. But yeah, I think most people are probably doing it because they think it's either more environmentally sound or because they think it's healthier for them. I think, yeah, like for me, like one of the big eye-opening things was when I first realized that organic doesn't mean pesticide-free. That was kind of a big eye-opening thing when I actually started learning about farming and learning about gardening for myself. That's when I kind of started reading people like Masanobu Fukuoka, and I started learning about how conventional farming is really kind of like hurting the farmer themselves because they're paying for a lot of these chemicals, a lot of these machines and equipment like tractors and stuff, and a lot of that stuff cuts into their profit as well. So if you're not like using any pesticides, for example, like yeah, you're going to lose some of your crop to insects like chewing the stuff up. So you might have less yield, but the profit on your yield might actually still be higher because your costs are that much lower. Because you're not spending the money on the chemicals, you're not spending the money on like say the harvesters. You might have to like harvest it by hand. You might lose some of the produce, but you might still actually be at a higher profit. So there's a lot of things to consider, and I think my solution that I've seen so far that is the best is to return to small scale farming and get more people into farming and get more young people into farming and doing homesteading. Naturally, I would want them to do veganic, homesteading, not like raising backyard chickens and stuff. But I think there's a real push for this, and there's a lot of people doing this, and there's a lot of young people doing this. So I realized, like, yeah, a lot of people living in cities, it's pretty impossible. But even on very small bits of land, people can produce a lot of food, especially if they're doing veganic growing. and not doing animal based agriculture. You can really produce a lot of food. So sweet potatoes, stuff like that grows really easily, and you can.
Did you hear that, Logan? Did you hear that? Sweet potatoes, baby.
As long as you rotate them so they don't deplete the soil. You don't want to monocrop the sweet potatoes.
I love me my sweet potatoes.
I love sweet potatoes
You just
too.
want enough.
But yeah, and actually, like about the whole question of whether you need fertilizers at all. I mean, that is something that if you do proper companion planting, you can actually account for that. So you can plant like corn and then put beans next to it. And the beans are nitrogen fixing, so they take the atmospheric nitrogen, they put it in the roots, and then they go into the ground. And then you can do that without having to do crop rotation. So you can grow like squash and corn and beans together. It's just hard to do that like in an automated way. So that's why they do monocropping, because you can bring these big machines that come in and they just kind of take the corn down and all that stuff. So they make it more efficient for machines. But if you're doing it by hand, you have to go in there and kind of pick the beans, then you pick the corn, then you pick the squash.
Yeah, there's something I wanted to say about that. So 2 points. So nitrogen fixating symbiosis is great, and that happens with bacteria. It also happens with different plants like beans. The other thing is that doesn't account for phosphate and potassium. So you need 3 basic macronutrients for plants. You need nitrogen, phosphate, and potassium. And sometimes an imbalance of these things could actually be more detrimental than beneficial. Now, oftentimes it doesn't work out that way because high NPK ratios aren't that much of a bad thing. Sometimes it's the phosphate that's higher and the potassium that's higher that ends up being the bad thing in terms of the NPK ratio. But the point being is there is potassium and phosphate that does need to happen. And the other thing in terms of small scale farming, the only concern that I have with this, and it is a big concern, is that the issue, one thing that's technologically made us advance as a civilization is that we've taken the percentage of farming jobs where it used to be in the 1700s, 1800s, where it used to be close to 90%, 90% of our workforce was tied up in farming. And if you look at that number now, it's 3%. So the issue that only potential issue I have, and the numbers need to be hashed out about this, is what percentage of our workforce would have to go back into farming in order to make this work. So, and when I look at things like permaculture advocates, even from institutes advocating permaculture, they've given me numbers that are scary. They've given me numbers to say that 30 to 40% of the workforce would have to go back into farming to do this on a large scale. Now, I don't know if those numbers are right. These aren't numbers from an anti small scale farming. These aren't numbers from people who are anti-permaculture. These are the pro-permaculture people. But I would need to see the numbers of how much of our workforce is actually going to need to go back into farming, because that could potentially be a very scary thing. I want science to continue to advance. I want technology to advance. I want the industry to advance. I don't want to go back to an agrarian society. So that's
I would.
Okay,
so
then we have
about that too. Like, yeah, if the number was like 75%, I would still be like all for it. But we could talk about it.
They actually said it might be 80. They said it might be 80%.
If it was 90%, I would still be
okay.
For it.
Well,
I mean, honestly, we can debate about it. But honestly, I just think like a lot of what we consider to be progress is actually quite harmful. And has allowed us to be able to do things that are actually quite dangerous for our continued existence on this earth. So I think a lot of the things that we view as like technological advancement are some of the things that directly caused, say, animal agriculture to become the way it is. To be able to treat these animals as commodities and farm them like in a factory situation. So yeah, I think it's quite dangerous. And I personally am looking to go back to kind of a more simple existence where I am growing my own food and doing more of that kind of thing. So yeah, we can talk about that, but that's a fascinating topic for me.
Yeah. So I think that we have a disagreement point on there. I'm not sure how interesting the debate would be, because I think we just value different things. As far as technology leading to harm, I think technology could be a double-edged sword, of course. But the conclusion I think people should reach is to use technology for a good and not for a bad, and not to abandon technology altogether. And there's value.
Oh, yeah. We wouldn't argue about that. I'm not suggesting that. What is that? The Erudites or whatever they were called, where they were like in favor of destroying technology. That's not
anarcho primitivism.
Yeah. No. I don't have that position. So
Okay.
we wouldn't
Yeah,
be
we can.
arguing that.
We can. So I mean, we can. I mean, what at the end of the day, if we just, what I'm saying is, if it just comes down to us at base level valuing different things, then there's not much I can say other than like I value this and you value that, and there wouldn't be much of an interesting conversation. But things like looking at data and what leads to what, and what would be a better society for the things that we both value. A society that goes back to agrarian and small scale farming versus, you know, an industry we're looking at science and technology. I come from an optimistic perspective, and I think the world can be changed for good. Obviously, any new technology can be used for bad, but I think in the direction we're going, I think if you compared where we are at now to where we are at in primitive cases, if you look at the lifespan, if you look at the well-being, I think overall there are bad things that have been happening, but overall I think we're going in the right direction, and there's still a lot that needs to be done. But I have confidence in humanity that we can do it, and we can use technology for good, and we can eliminate the technology that's being used for bad. I think we can reharness that to use it for good. I think we can make use of the double-edged sword by blunting one edge and sharpening the other.
Cool. Yeah, I'm an optimistic person by nature as well. So like we don't disagree there, but yeah, that would be an interesting discussion. I think we should hold another one.
Yeah, for sure.
All right, cool, man. All right, guys, I'm going to actually need to get going anyway because I got the kids in the bath. I can hear them in the other room. My wife's taking care of them. So, yeah, it was great. I had a lot of fun, and hopefully it was interesting for everybody on the chat and stuff. So thanks for everybody for joining. And thanks, Avi. Thanks, Logan. It was a blast.
My
Peace out,
pleasure.
guys.
Take care.
Cool. All right. See you guys. Bye.